This is the final part on our lecture series on cardiovascular system. Today we'll be talking about blood. The blood has a wide range of functions. Its transport functions include transportation of oxygen and nutrients to our body cells, and transporting CO2 as well as metabolic waste to their site of elimination. Blood also allows our hormones to travel from their site of release to their target organs. And in terms of their regulatory function, blood allows our body to maintain body temperature, allows for maintenance of normal blood pH within a tight range. It also allows maintenance of fluid volume in our body. And its protected functions include formation of blood clot that prevent us from bleeding to death, as well as having white blood cells that serve immune functions to fight off the infections. So you can take a sample of blood and spin it out in a centrifuge. It will layer out like this. The bottommost layer is our erythrocyte. Above that, fluffy coat, and then on top of that, the plasma. Erythrocyte being the densest layer, it takes up about 45% of whole blood by volume. Okay, and leukocyte plus platelets together take up less than 1% of whole blood by volume. And these two layers include all the cellular components of blood. So these cellular components of blood are also called formed elements. Floating on top is the least dense layer. This is plasma. Okay, so this is generally about 55% of whole blood by volume. And within plasma, dissolved in plasma are soluble proteins like albumin. We've also got clotting factors and other ions. Okay. So you can measure the height of this erythrocyte column. Okay, and divide it by the height of the entire column. And that will get you a value called hematocrit. Hematocrit basically measures the proportion of whole blood that consists of red blood cells. And this is critical because it's seen as an indirect measure of the oxygen carrying capacity of your blood, because red blood cells carry oxygen. Okay, so formed elements, once again, means the cellular component of blood. Okay, it's made up with leukocyte, also known as white blood cells, erythrocyte, also known as red blood cells, platelets, also known as thrombocytes. Okay, leuko means white, erythro means red, and thrombo in thrombocyte, thrombo means clot. So blood, because platelets are involved in initiating the blood clot formation, so hence they're also called thrombocytes. Hematopoiesis or hemopoiesis is the formation of blood cells, whether that's formation of red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets. We have specific terms to describe formation of white blood cells, that's called leukopoiesis. Formation of red blood cells is called erythropoiesis. Formation of platelets is called thrombopoiesis. Okay, but you'll see that all cells, all blood cells came from a common ancestor called the hemocytoblast. So this hemocytoblast can differentiate and then eventually turning into different blood cells. All blood cells arise from red bone marrow, which is found mainly in flat bones such as hip bone, breastbone, skull, vertebrae, etc. Okay, and then we also have various types of white blood cells with different functions. Okay. The main function of red blood cells is in its ability to carry oxygen. Okay. So red blood cells, each of them contain about 250 million molecules of hemoglobin. They're packed with this molecule called hemoglobin. So hemoglobin can be considered a molecular sponge for oxygen. Okay. It's made up by two alpha globin chains and two beta globin chains. And within each of these globin chains, we can find a heme group. Okay. And this heme group has a porphyrin portion, and then in the center, okay, we find an iron that it's attached to an iron. Okay. And this heme pigment is also what causes blood to appear red. And the state, the reduction or oxidation state of the iron in the center will determine whether the color is dark red or bright red. Okay. So hemoglobin is able to bind and release oxygen as it circulates through our body. It binds to oxygen in our lungs and then carries the oxygen to our tissues to release. Okay, and then the hemoglobin now is deoxygenated and then transported along with the rest of the hemoglobin within that red blood cell back to the lung to be reoxygenated. So red blood cells don't live forever. We only have a certain number of red blood cells in circulation. They usually, on average, have a lifespan about 3 months, and some are young and some are old. As old ones get removed and as parts recycled, new cells are produced to replace those that were lost. Okay. And so red blood cells, especially damaged ones, can get trapped within the spleen. Okay. And so in conditions such as sickle cell anemia, where the red blood cell is misshaped, the spleen can actually become an organ that traps too much red blood cells, causing the person to become anemic. Okay. But when it's functioning normally in people without those conditions, it allows us to remove the damaged cells. Also, red blood cells are not considered true cells because they're enucleate, meaning they do not have a nucleus anymore. What happens is during the process of the final stage of maturation, okay, red blood cell actually gets its nucleus extruded from their cell body. So mature red blood cells actually no longer contain that nucleus. For that reason, they cannot divide, they cannot grow, they cannot be repaired. Okay, and so it's another reason why when you look at red blood cells under a microscope, okay, you won't see any nucleus within. I don't have a very good image here. Actually, I could see it here. Okay, so you can't see any nucleus inside for that reason. So if you recall, homeostasis is defined as your body's ability to maintain a relatively stable internal condition despite changing environment. Okay. And so our body must regulate red blood cell within a certain number. Okay. And this process of red blood cell formation is called erythropoiesis. Okay. So if we look at the regulation of red blood cell production, we can see that it can be triggered by these different stimuli. Hypoxia, inadequate oxygen delivery, okay, that can be a result of multiple different causes, either because of loss of red blood cells, inability to make red blood cells because inadequate number of hemoglobins, despite normal number of red blood cells, or decreased availability of oxygen, such as when you reach high altitude. Right, all those can result in hypoxia that serves as a stimulus for erythropoiesis. So what happens is this stimulus triggers kidney to secrete a hormone called erythropoietin. Okay, and so erythropoietin released into blood then goes to stimulate red bone marrow to increase its production of red blood cell. So increased erythropoiesis. Okay, and that will then raise the oxygen carrying capacity of our blood. Okay. And through this mechanism, you can see why patients with chronic kidney disease oftentimes also have anemia. Right? Their kidney is unable to secrete erythropoietin. That even if they have the stimulus of hypoxia, decreased red blood cell count, decreased availability of oxygen, decreased number of hemoglobin. Okay, regardless of all these stimuli, their kidney are not able to secrete erythropoietin, and then they will end up with anemia. Now let's talk about erythrocyte disorders. Erythrocyte disorders can be divided into two broad categories: anemia and polycythemia. Anemia is when you have insufficient red blood cell count. Okay, so in other words, your hematocrit is below around 45, right? So someone with hematocrit of 30 would be anemic. Polycythemia, or excess red blood cell count, will be above that normal range. And that normal range can vary whether you're a woman or man, female versus male, and also can vary by age and other factors as well. Okay. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to consider 45 to be normal. And so someone has hematocrit of 60, that will be too high. Okay, and they will be polycythemic. Now, for anemia, okay, patients have reduced oxygen carry capacity in your blood. And so some of the symptoms they will present with would be fatigue, feeling cold, okay, because one of the important properties of blood is that it helps with heat, distributing heat around your body, right? And so they will present with chills, pallor, dyspnea, shortness of breath, okay? And so looking at anemia, we can divide it further into three general categories based on their cause. There's anemia due to blood loss, anemia due to decreased production, anemia due to increased red blood cell destruction. Okay. And so within each of these categories is a wide range of different causes. An example of anemia due to blood loss will be someone gets hemorrhagic shock. They get into a car accident, bleeding out of an artery or vein in large amount. Okay. Another could be more of a chronic cause. Someone has gastric ulcer, an ulcer in your stomach that's bleeding over time without them knowing. So, and they can also be anemic, develop anemia over time. Okay, so those all be anemia due to blood loss. Now, causes, example of causes where there is decreased red blood cell production. Say someone has a bone marrow cancer that's preventing their bone marrow from being able to produce red blood cells. Okay, it could also be nutritional deficiency, like folate deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency. It could be iron deficiency. Those are all causes that would lead to reduced red blood cell production. Okay, and then the last category of anemia due to increased red blood cell destruction. So that will be including sickle cell anemia, okay, where the sickle-shaped red blood cells are destroyed at a higher rate than normal red blood cells. There's also hereditary spherocytosis, and then there is also, if you have a mechanical valve, okay, you can also have increased red blood cell destruction from the shearing forces across the valve. So there are a wide range of pathology under each of these categories as well. Okay. Oh, okay. So this is what we just discussed: hemorrhagic anemia from rapid blood loss, usually treated by just blood replacement transfusion. And whereas you can also have a chronic cause, the example I gave was a bleeding ulcer. And the treatment of that will be to treat the ulcer to stop the chronic blood loss. And as I also mentioned before, anemia due to insufficient red blood cell production, we can have iron deficiency anemia. This is characterized by microcytosis. You'll see that the red blood cells are smaller than usual. Also, they have a larger paler. That area that is pale within the center of the red blood cell is expanded. So basically, these cells are smaller than normal red blood cells. Okay. So can be caused by insufficient dietary iron. Could be also caused by impaired absorption of iron within the digestive tract. Okay. And red blood cells that are produced are called microcytes because they are small. Okay. And these cells cannot synthesize hemoglobin because there's a lack of iron. So the treatment will be iron supplements. Okay. And yet another cause of anemia due to insufficient red blood cell production is pernicious anemia. This is an autoimmune disease that actually destroys the stomach mucosa. And stomach mucosa typically produces intrinsic factor that is essential for absorption of vitamin B12. So without the intrinsic factor, we can't absorb vitamin B12. And without vitamin B12, red blood cells cannot divide. And this actually results in macrocytosis, cells that are arrested during cell cycle and they cannot divide. They're arrested at a stage just before their cell division. So that's why the cells actually end up being larger than what we would expect from normal red blood cells. So macrocytosis. Treatment, you replenish the person with vitamin B12. Okay. It could be due to this. It can also, so insufficient dietary intake of vitamin B12 can also cause this macrocytosis. Okay. Now, anemia due to excessive red blood cell destruction. Okay, they're also referred to as okay. So there is a subcategory due to premature lysis of red blood cells. These are called hemolytic anemias. Okay, and as I mentioned, there are a number of different factors, different causes. It can be incompatible transfusion, which rarely occurs anymore, especially in developed countries. It could be infections. It could also be hereditary conditions like sickle cell anemia, hereditary spherocytosis, etc. Okay, now polycythemia. So unlike anemia where you have an inadequate amount of red blood cells, in polycythemia you have too much. So too much is not good either because when you have too many red blood cells, it increases the viscosity of your blood. So it causes your blood flow to be more sluggish. And that's dangerous because one of the dangers of having thick blood, especially going to your brain, you can cause elevated risk of stroke. And at your heart, it causes elevated risk for heart attack. So those are all very dangerous situations. Okay. So primary polycythemia involves spontaneous proliferation of red blood cells within the bone marrow, whereas secondary polycythemia is an induced condition. Okay. And so polycythemia vera is the subtype of primary polycythemia, and it's a bone marrow cancer that leads to too much red blood cells being produced. Okay, and the treatment of it will be therapeutic phlebotomy. So regularly letting out some blood. Okay, and then as we mentioned, secondary polycythemia is an induced condition. It's induced through physiological changes that increases the body's demand for oxygen or for erythropoietin production. So, for example, certain types of cardiac disease, okay, where the blood isn't being or your basically there's your body senses insufficient oxygen supply, so it ramps up EPO production and triggers more red blood cells to be produced. Okay, living at high altitudes because of the low oxygen tension at high altitudes also triggers your body to to try to create more red blood cells. Okay. Certain lung diseases, as you can imagine, if your lungs aren't able to function normally and help you obtain just as much oxygen, your body senses that low oxygen. So it's going to stimulate EPO production and then try to make more red blood cells. Okay. Severe obesity, this can happen when someone is so morbidly obese that it's impairing their ability to expand their thoracic cage and to obtain the same amount of oxygen as a normal person would. So in that sense, it can also trigger erythropoietin production. Okay. And defective oxygen transport. Okay. So someone has, for example, carbon monoxide poisoning. Okay. Okay, so blood doping is a process where athletes remove, store, and reinfuse red blood cells before an event to increase oxygen levels for stamina. And this can actually be very dangerous for the same reason as other causes of polycythemia. Okay, so as we mentioned, the danger with this um, increasing red blood cells above a normal level is that, especially with exercise, athletes become dehydrated, and that thick blood can increase your risk for stroke and heart attack.